Jamie, welcome to Political Hope.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, so we're jumping right into the dolphin pod.
Let's
I like
do
to call
it.
it dolphin pod instead of Shark Tank. So in the dolphin pod, what is political hope to you? Like, what does that mean to you?
That's such a great question. And I really appreciate your framing and orientation towards the positive. Sometimes that can be hard to find these days. So political hope. I mean, I think some of the function of politics is essentially to create a communication medium in which we can have like better collective intelligence and improved coordination. So when we come together as a nation or a state or a city, essentially what we're doing is we're pulling together resources and looking out for our own collective and individual interests. And so when I think of political hope, I think of the opportunity in the future to improve those coordination mechanisms, to become more collectively intelligent, to become more coordinated, not only in solving problems, but in also like representing people, getting their consent for governance, at both the individual and societal scale.
Wow. Now I need to take a breath after you said that. Yeah, I love the word that you said, coordination mechanisms. Right. And I think that's interesting, coordination, right? Like, I mean, first, if you can set aside your like triggers from math class with coordinates, like coordination is how we get things done.
Right.
Like we wouldn't have to close that where we're.
If there wasn't mass like global coordination, most likely, yes.
Or the house we live in,
Sure,
or
absolutely.
the food we eat, right? But what you're talking about when we talk about like political and politics, and I'm curious because obviously I have all this cool stuff, and you got Wikitongues coming in, and we'll talk about Wikitongues in a moment. But how much of coordination is dependent on the allocation and the language of resources?
Well, it depends on what resources you're thinking of. I mean, so much political coordination that happens requires different resources at different levels of government. So when I think of like the federal level, and I think of federal level coordination, like let's just take one small like aspect of governance, which is Congress becoming informed on matters related to policy. There's a variety of different intelligence agencies that inform Congress. There's even the Library of Congress that has its own Congressional Revenue Service that informs Congress. So all of these agencies together, not only like, I'm not saying they coordinate between agencies, but they are representative of a coordination mechanism to collectively inform congressional members on matters of policy. Now, those actual mechanisms could be through like the delivering of reports or submitting content in a database or representatives going and sitting down with congresspersons. So, I mean, the resources that accommodate those things are paid for by our government. If we take that down a couple of layers, I think what we find is that it's probably a little bit more difficult to coordinate at the level at which I would hope and assume Congress at least has the ability to, because there may be fewer resources to afford such services at the state and local level. Like, for example, my understanding is that local governments and state governments may not have access to the Library of Congress Congressional Revenue Service, nor is there anything comparable that I'm aware of that serves to perform research at the request of state and city council members to gather knowledge on an issue that they're developing policy on, to deliver it to them in a way in which they can easily like comprehend and apply that content. So I do think that coordination is dependent on resources, and I think that this is a unsubstantiated claim, but my current assumption is that most of those resources are aggregated at the top, understandably.
Interesting. That's it's kind of funny, right? Like I've been doing a lot of stuff in soil recently, like getting my hands in the soil, but also thinking about soil and how food works, and there seems to be this like interesting like loop, like a torus, like TO. Do you know what torus is? The shape of a torus.
Is that the horoscope symbol?
No, not the horoscope symbol. Oh my God.
Like, you're drawing something with your hands and I'm like, is that the horns? Oh, okay. We're back to math again. Okay.
Oh, great. Oh, my bad about that. I can't help it. So the torus is like it's a magnetic field, right? It's kind of like what the planet is, kind of like you have the North Pole and then it comes around, and magnetic fields have this kind of toroidal kind of aspect to them, right? But the same thing I noticed happens in nature. We digest food, it comes out, it goes back into soil, it reprocesses, it comes back out, comes down. Like there is this like process of the elements going in and out of each other, the cycles, right? But you have this process of like policy making, and you have this process of like deciding on where resources, how this should be allocated, like you just mentioned. But it doesn't seem to have a flow. Like it goes one spot, and at once it gets kind of like stuck there, kind of like a broken channel, and it doesn't keep flowing down and out and up.
Well, I mean, I suppose that could be assumed. I wouldn't say that I would necessarily make that claim because I'm not sure. I believe anyone can go to the Library of Congress Congressional Research Service website and look up at least some of the reports that have been requested by congressional members. So it perhaps like what's not being cycled through is an awareness and understanding of all the resources that are actually available at the more local levels of government. But of course, I'm not so sure that the priorities of congressional members at the federal level are comparable to what's of concern at the local level. It's actually one of the roles that my organization is looking to fulfill. We're trying to model after the Library of Congress Congressional Revenue Service and offer these services at the city council level. So we offer contracts to city council members through the Society Library, which is my organization, where we will perform research on hyperlocal issues. And we even take that a step further. Not only are we, we'll deliver the research that we've gathered, it can be in a familiar format like a report, but we're also building decision-making models. So it's extremely easy to just immediately start applying that knowledge to decision making. And one of the ways we do this is we just break down all of what we find into positions and arguments and claims, model the relationships to each other, and then through a very easy like micro voting checklist system, people can apply that knowledge. And our goal is to enable more informed, inclusive, and unbiased decisions at that local level.
So that's really exciting because what you're talking about now is educating the public, right? In a way that makes sense so they could be more engaged and involved. And I would even throw in there that there's like local leaders, at least in my personal experience being involved in local government, local politics, highly uninformed. Most recently, the city that I was in, an IT professional was voted in, and she was in her like late 30s, and she's digital native, and everybody was relying on her to read all of the all of the bills or anything that was being passed in the city. They were like looking to her to tell her, but that's biased, right?
I mean, well, it also goes back to coordination. I don't believe we can really expect any individual to be, a generalist in everything. Our society is so unbelievably complex these days. So we do have to rely on others. But I do believe that there are ways in which we can de-bias certain systems. Right. So a whole council relying on one individual to interpret something, maybe they're not aware of the way in which this particular person could be biased in terms of values, and that would inform the way they interpret things. So diversifying the number of people who are interpreting this content is one mechanism that could help, requiring that this person qualify their interpretations of certain ideas by providing reason. And then there's different techniques you can use. This is actually something you can borrow from the CIA. You can just take whatever reasons and claims, invert them to their opposite, and then go and research to as much as you can to support that counter argument. And so it's a way of trying to like balance out one's understanding, because there's so many ways in which we're biased.
And I think that's one of the reasons why I am very impressed with what you're doing with Open Society is that Society Library. I mixed that one. But I feel like one of the things I've noticed and I've seen like your consistency with this idea of allowing there to be countering ideas present at the same moment and exploring countering ideas. And in my experience, that's like spiritual and philosophical development, right? Being able to holding two ideas. So like, can you share more about that? Like, why is that important? What is the future if we hold more space for that?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a really big question. There's so many things that I could say. Why is it important? Well, the reason why it's important to the Society Library is because we have a commitment towards sincerely inquiring into truth. So we want to explore what's true. And our whole organization is actually modeled off of some of the ideas of Benjamin Franklin, who's, quintessential American and all that. But when you take seriously the idea of really trying to investigate what's true, I think that absolutely necessitates exploring all points of view, including the ones that are inherently contradictory. And you can save yourself time if you just assume that most claims have at least a directly inverse contradiction. And so going and exploring and seeing, okay, well, what does this argument have to say, just improves your conception of the whole space. All like the whole problem in and of itself, you can see a little bit more of by exploring those edges. In terms of a spiritual practice, I suppose I could comment and say that the work that we do and the techniques that we work our hardest to adhere to are very like humbling. We actually have a virtues and values page, and one of our virtues and values is intellectual humility. So just kind of accepting like how unbelievably complex and voluminous knowledge is out there about the problems we care about solving, and how we just have to accept that, and then just try to find the different techniques and strategies so that we can inquire into truth the best we possibly can.
Oh my gosh, I love that. Hashtag all that. Two things. I had to put two pins on what you're saying, right? One was you said Benjamin Franklin, and like, for better or worse, sometimes you got to be a crazy mofo to do some crazy mofo stuff in the world, you know? And that dude was a crazy mofo, but he was brilliant because he was a crazy mofo. Or maybe he became a crazy mofo because he was brilliant, whatever it is. The other thing I'm going to say is, as you were explaining that, I was thinking about how in Hermetic philosophy, Hermetic like alchemy, right? Magic, quote unquote, Hermetic magic, they say that if you're able to look at a subject from 8 different directions, 8 perspectives, then you have one of the most clearest perspective. I mean, they say you have an alchemical perspective then.
Oh, well, that's so interesting that you mentioned that number, because we're currently working on a project now where we're mapping out a public debate about an issue happening in California. So there's one remaining nuclear power plant in California. It has 2 nuclear reactors. The reactors are set to be decommissioned in 2024 and 2025. It's called Diablo Canyon Nuclear Power Plant. And we've been working on mapping all the different arguments, claims, and evidence from the differing points of view about what should happen to this power plant, because it was set to be closed down. There's been some, activists and celebrities and billionaires who seem to be pushing back on that, expressing their argumentation and talking about the importance of not closing it down. And so we've been mapping out the arguments. I think we are sourcing knowledge from 995 like Diablo Canyon specific pieces of content. And that's like TikToks, NRC reports, legislation, like all different types of media we're sourcing from. And I think we're about over 2,500 arguments, but we initially had like 8 positions, and now we just found our 9th position. So there's 9 positions that you can take on this specific debate if the debate is framed by the question, what should happen to the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant? And it's a variety of different answers related to, yes, it should be open pending conditions, or no, it shouldn't be open pending conditions. And the 9th one, the last one, is it's impossible to actually know what we should do.
That's an option too. That's
of course. I think that's always an option.
That is so brilliant. Like, first of all, I think it's awesome to aggregate. Like, you're talking about data, right? And we're talking about data based on feelings, emotions, knowledge, experience, suffering. Yep. Like, we're like bringing all of that into that, right? And then you're aggregating these human perspectives, right, together for decision making. Now here's the thing. So you got to 9, right? That's awesome. So how does that translate like towards the decision? Like, how does that, what's the next step for that?
Yeah, so it's actually the exact next step. So we're working on wrapping up that collection now. Still a little bit more to do. I'd like it to go a little bit longer than we initially planned, but we're trying to race to finish things up. And I do want to quickly say too, it's not just like people's sentiments and experience and emotions and opinions, but it's also like, economic arguments from MIT and stuff like that. But the next step is literally to take these 9 positions and the argumentation for and against supporting that one of these positions is correct, and putting it in one of our decision-making models. So someone could actually go through, and if they really wanted to make an informed decision on this, if they wanted to, they could use the model and go position by position, argument by argument, and like micro vote on each like small dimension, because we break it up and make it much easier. And they could essentially see, like, how do I feel about this once I've like stopped, focused on one issue at a time, made a micro decision before moving on, all things being considered, where do I land on this issue? In what direction? And we're looking to create a specific iteration of our decision-making model so that people can see specifically where do they lean on ethical issues, where do they lean on economic issues, where do they lean on environmental issues. So it's just about reflecting back to people the process of their decision if they were able to externalize it. Because the problem with making decisions in our minds is that we're subject to so many cognitive biases and we can make so many logical reasoning errors. I think there's over 190 cognitive biases and over 300 logical fallacies. So there's many ways in which we like fail to compute things rationally, and like that's okay. But if we externalize it and break it up into a process, we may improve that decision-making ability just a bit.
Yeah, you're on point with that too. I mean, it's also, people can have a bad day. You could not sleep one day, and yet that affects your decision making. I mean, you could be the best decision maker in the world, and your girlfriend breaks up with you. I'm like, impossible. Everything's impossible to do.
Right. Yeah.
I'm the ninth option for everything. So that's awesome. Okay, so here's my question I'm gonna pose to you that kind of like leans further into the asset framing. Okay, let's say what you're doing, and we didn't even talk about Wikitongues yet, right? But let's say what you're doing with Society Library, it starts taking off and it starts being adapted and used in the different ways that you envision, and maybe some ways that right now you envision through this conversation. Maybe there are new ways you're envisioning how it can be supportive. Wikitongues starts to also kick off. I wonder, and I'm curious how that intersects with what this is, what Society Library is doing too.
Yeah.
What's the best, where's the glass ceiling like in 3 years for what this is doing?
Got it. Okay, so let me just quickly say, in case the audience doesn't know, Society Library is a collective intelligence nonprofit, and we map a bunch of knowledge. Wikitongues, and I'm the founding executive director of the Society Library. For Wikitongues, I'm just on the board. I'm a board member of Wikitongues. They brought me on because I have experience in archiving related to our work at the Society Library. And I also have a background in international sustainable development. So Wikitongues has this beautiful mission of archiving and enabling the revitalization of the world's 7,000 languages. So they're working to create a knowledge seed bank or a language seed bank of all these languages so that not only the knowledge, but the words and expressions, because they collect audio content as well, can be preserved, but also creating all of the different educational assets so that they can be picked up again and revitalized and used. And so they've got an absolutely wonderful mission. I was particularly compelled to support Wikitongues in a board member role because, of course, the Society Library is currently very constrained in terms of working in a US-centric, English-based frame, and we work with English-based content. And it would be really lovely if over time, Wikitongues and the Society Library could work together somehow to make the Society Library accessible in more languages. And that's no promise, that's no agreement that's already been made, but that is my secret wish. So if the executive director is listening, he'll now know.
Glass ceiling too, glass ceiling. So what would happen? Like, what do you see happening? Like, what is the best potential reality that can form from more synergy with Society Library? Huh?
With the Society Library and Wikitongues together?
I mean, probably because even Wikitongues seems to be also invigorating other organizations, right? Like there could be more, like let's lean into the possibility.
Well, I think one of the things that's important about the Wikitongues mission is that it's not just like a linguist project. It's not a linguistic project in and of itself. It's also like inherently political, because many of the ways in which languages become endangered is because of political oppression. And so by protecting these languages, by working with native speakers, some of them are like the last remaining native speakers, and protecting them, that is a way of like inherently giving their culture power, the knowledge of their culture power. And I think that's incredibly important. And maybe down the line, the Society Library could be working in other regions such that through the tools that we're building, marginalized groups that face political oppression, an indicator of which is the removal and oppression of their language, maybe tools we can make could help the more like functional negotiation and coordination between governments, political groups, and marginalized communities, such that both can exist, be protected, and flourish in the way that they deserve.
That's beautifully said. And I'll add an anecdote, like a like a real life situation. In the city that I was commissioner in, El Cerrito, Human Relations. There was consistently events going on about anti-hate, right? They had like anti-hate events, anti-hate whatever. Especially during the pandemic, there was anti-Asian stuff, right, going on. I come from a Sikh community. Like, there's been a lot of violence against Sikh because we wear beards and turbans, and oftentimes that's considered like associated with terrorists, right? And so what was happening, what I was noticing was walking around the community, that no one was attending those anti-hate that was actually experiencing the hate in the community. And they like didn't even understand that that was even happening. And even when bills or ideas were being proposed in the city hall, they were not even attending the city hall because there wasn't an explanation in their language, right? Whether it was Punjabi from my language, or it was, I was talking to Asian people, like older Asian folks who were experiencing it. They didn't even speak English or well enough to show up to the city hall meetings and participate in anti-hate violence that they were experiencing, right? So that was interesting to experience that anecdotally.
Yeah, and I mean, this kind of goes back to the whole like resources necessitating coordination question, right? If there were more resources, if the Society Library and Wikitongues had all the resources in the world, perhaps these communities would have been well aware. But coordination is constrained, I think, to a certain extent by resources and the availability of them and the savviness of people who can make do with less. But I think that in a society, especially in matters that relate to government and policy and also social justice, perhaps there should be more resources provided, because those are matters in which coordination is integral. Yes,
100%. And I think that's the unique space we're in. I'm really grateful to have you taking a lead on this stuff, especially as a young person. We're gonna say we're young, okay? As a young person, but also a woman, there's a nuance there, right? There's a nuance of compassion, altruism, listening, altruism. Did I say altruism? Yeah, altruism, right? Like being able to hold that space, right? Because too often times there's too much of a rush of being successful, getting on top of somebody else, getting on top of others, beating everybody to the front of the line, right? But that's not, I don't think that's sustainable.
Oh, that's so hard to say. I mean, sustainability is one question. It's hard to say because let's say hypothetically, the person who is like the first mover in a space, they may also happen to be, have the long-term altruistic intentions. And maybe there's a way in which they have a change of heart, or those altruistic intentions are realized and they are committed to making the space they left behind more sustainable. Right. Who knows? I will say that, I wouldn't even say that I'm taking the lead here, because there's a whole community of practitioners who are approaching this problem of how do we improve our, not only our politics, but our collective intelligence, our collective coordination. There's a whole series of practitioners who work on different things. And I have great respect for those groups. Like, for example, the bridging communities are fantastic. There's actually an upcoming event called Listen First by America Talks, where it's over 400 organizations who are a part of this coalition who have dedicated themselves to bridging divides between like polarized groups. So there's just so much out there, which is really lovely. And I'm just one of those practitioners.
Yeah, I mean, you even have like all this kind of stuff. Like look at this. Do you remember this?
Oh, yep, our Medium article. Yep, we try to like publish interesting insights that we think people may find interesting.
I love this anatomy of CNN's embedded side aside, and that's a cool I like the idea of like looking deeper at where the information is coming from, why, the epistemology of it, right?
Oh yeah, so that particular article, let me see, what is it called again? I forget.
This was something from Biden's speech about gun owners.
Oh, no. Scroll to the top of the page. Let's see.
Oh, evolving text on the web.
That's right. Okay, so evolving text on the web is all about something that's of great interest to myself and the Society Library, which is what are the new forms of knowledge and media expression? So there's so much knowledge out there. How do you make editorial decisions is one question. But another question is, well, how can you pack all of that relevant knowledge in a way so that people are making the editorial decisions about how much they want to see at a given time? And so this was an article about our first iteration of what we call web-based conceptual portmanteau, which is us packing multimedia, multi-expression concepts into a single claim. So how can you read, how can you see a claim that is expressed in video, in audio, in simple language, in technical language, in humorous language? How can you see the references? How can you see media? Where can you go next? So we've been thinking about literally the structure of knowledge and how that can be changed because of web-based technologies. We don't necessarily need to be stuck on paragraphs on paper any longer. We have the hyperlink, that's great. We've got hover over pop-ups, cool. What's next?
Yeah, what's next? What's next is us yelling at people. Hey, stop! I know what you're thinking. Think the other thing.
Well, I would never tell anyone that.
I'm just kidding.
I will say here's an interesting thing for your listeners. If they haven't heard the concept of intellectual freedom. Intellectual freedom is a library concept. And there's a whole office for intellectual freedom at the American Library Association. They're the ones who are dedicated to stopping the banning of books, who are very anti-censorship. Anti-censorship, the word prior to the Trump era, I would say, because I think it's taken on different connotations now. But yeah, so there's this concept of it's okay for people to think all sorts of things. It's okay for them to read and research all sorts of things. Because I haven't seen this explicitly stated, but I think one of the fundamental premises of intellectual freedom is that intellectual enlightenment is possible through access to more information, not less. So it's okay to let people go ahead and explore, just encourage them to keep exploring. Don't stop exploring.
Yeah, lean into the conversations, right? Lean in, because sometimes, I notice this for myself personally. I love to enter spaces that other people like me are not there. Right? And whether that's whether it's racial or philosophical or political these days, right? Because they're even becoming very homogenous, right? Political spaces. And so I love to go to these spaces and be almost like a steward of an altering perspective, an altering experience.
I love it.
But I noticed too that when I do that, I always receive gratitude when I'm resilient to stay in it. Later on, people come up to me, they're like, thank you for being here. I never knew the Indians were like this. I never knew there were other philosophical perspectives. I didn't ever know there was other economic ideas. I didn't literally, people say that, they come up afterwards.
Well, I just want to double underline that or double click it or whatever the phrase is, because I actually think that's a really important lesson. I think that's a really brave thing to do. And I think that's bridging. And it was funny when you initially said that going into spaces, I immediately thought physical space. And I was like, I don't do that. Maybe I should do that. I'd never leave my office. But then I realized, wait a minute, I do that all the time, but in knowledge spaces. So going to obscure social media platforms and taking a look at what people are saying and like all the different areas of the internet basically is where the spaces.
I hope you're going to get massages once in a while and self-care, maybe get some retreat. You got to take, because if you're going into those internet spaces, some of them are a little bit weird,
The weirdness doesn't bother me. Darkness is alarming. I don't go into too dark places. But the weird and the wacky and all of that, I understand how people can end up in a space where they are demoralized or hateful. I understand that, and that's okay. So as long as it's not too dark, it's actually kind of intellectually tickling to see what are people's lives like and how do they express that in language?
#intellectual tickle. So that's beautiful. I think it's a very good segue for my next question for you, which is what does give you this philosophical grounding? Wait, hold on, before you answer that, what gives you this, what gives you the compass to do this work that you're doing to facilitate this organization, to be a part of other organizations? Who is the current leaders, who are the philosophical heroes of the past that might inspire you? Or do you have metaphysical guidance? What's giving you the compass?
Yeah, so I would say that I'm really fortunate to have discovered this compass when I was very young. When I was, if people are watching the video, they can see that I wear glasses. If you're listening, I wear glasses, and I've actually had glasses for a really long time, because when I was a little girl, I thought I was watching television and I got this impression through stereotypes that in order to be someone who is considered smart, you have to wear glasses. So I became obsessed with this idea because I respected intelligent people, like the family members of mine who everyone regarded as intelligent, I really loved. I wanted to be like them. And so I was like, well, I need glasses then. If I'm going to be a smart person, I need glasses. And so I was walking home from my like aunt's house to my grandmother's or something one day, and I found a pair of like broken glasses on the side of the road, and I put them on my face. And I get home and my mother's like, take those off your face right now, because if you leave them on, you're going to ruin your eyes and then you'll really need glasses. I said, oh, you need to have ruined eyes to wear glasses. Well, and I walked outside and stared into the sun and burned my eyes to legal blindness. And now I've had to wear glasses for the rest of my life. And so, but what was interesting was like, I only really discovered how bad my vision was when I went to school and saw that I couldn't see the clock. And we had these clock tests, and I'm a straight A student, and I was failing these clock tests, not being able to tell time. And they're like, oh, she's blind. She can't see like 20 feet in front of her face. And
Wow.
so that was the epiphany. It was like, wait a minute, like this didn't work. Like I got glasses and I'm not like smarter all of a sudden. And like, I actually made myself for a moment dumber because I was unable to do something.
Wow.
And it made me realize knowledge is really powerful. Ideas are really powerful. And that what happened was I fell for a really bad idea. It was essentially an unsound argument, but I like miscomputed information that was not good for me. I acted on it, and it's going to affect me for the rest of my life. And I was hyper aware of the power of ideas, the power of rhetoric, the power of knowledge. You could tell someone something to make them cry, and it doesn't even have to be true. And it has changed them because we invest belief in these things. And so I've just kind of been hyper aware of that for a really long time. And then when you asked about figures who inspire me, Benjamin Franklin, who I created the organization after, he, I find him to be brilliant in many ways, but he had this idea that he had in his autobiography, and it blew me away. I was like, why has no one digitized this? So the Society Library is essentially like the digitization of a method that Benjamin Franklin developed to find solutions to social problems. Because when we're thinking about and worrying about the power of knowledge, the most consequential bad decisions are like the political ones, because they affect many people. One decision can affect many people. So those are the ones I think we should really take great care to get right.
Dang. Oh, I feel like Benjamin Franklin is somewhere like going like, yes, live long, my child, live long. Or I don't know, maybe you guys are hanging out, drinking some booze together. I don't know, whatever. But that's beautiful. First of all, I want to acknowledge that, like, hey, like, it's crazy how like that assumption that was informed by you looking up to something, right? Like you were admiring something and you looked up, but then you made this like you said, unsound, right? Like assumption, right? That ended up hurting you. And it's funny, right? It seems like that is doesn't matter what your ideology at this moment, right? Or your philosophy. I'm being very generalized, I know, but I'm noticing the same pattern in all different communities, wherever I'm traveling, wherever I'm speaking to, different ages, different backgrounds. There are some really toxic assumptions going around in every direction. It doesn't really matter what your ideology. Very rarely do I meet anybody who's like, I don't know. I don't know. I generally don't know. Tell me, please, teach me. And so how do we cultivate that? Like, do you have any idea? I mean, we're also kind of like just like, heartstorming here. Like, how do we cultivate that I don't knowness? Yeah.
Well, actually, so the Society Library has some educational programs, and we've got, I think, 8 different educational internship programs at universities. 32, we've worked with 32 universities to offer these to students, and many of them actually start with these exercises that we call media deconstruction exercises, where we have students take a piece of media, whether it's a documentary or a television clip or an article or something. We break it up for them sentence by sentence. And then what we have them do is we have them extract the logical meaning of every single sentence and break it up into all of the different like implied, implicit, and derivable claims. And what they they literally tell us they get a new sight from these exercises of deconstructing content. Like, the Green New Deal, for example, is like 13 pages long if you copy paste it to a Google Doc. But I think there's like 438 claims that are being made. And the interesting thing about legislation is oftentimes they don't cite their sources. You know, they just say, according to the IPCC, blah, blah, blah findings, we therefore conclude thus. And so when we have students do that, they're like, wow, I literally see how dense with meaning language and writing really is. And then what we have them do is like, okay, now go and find research to prove all of these claims. And what they gain a sense of is understanding like the burden of what it takes to actually like have confidence or have evidence that something is true. Like if you believe the Green New Deal, like once you go through the exercise of deconstructing it into all of its claims and then finding evidence and argumentation, and then the exercise continues, invert it to its opposite and argue against it, you begin to realize like, wow, this is actually extremely complex. And, you know, oftentimes we just have to rely on all of these mental shortcuts, like believing the IPCC is like the highest standard of science and like was developed, like their reports are developed through the most rigorous like coordination of like the best experts in the world, which is a fine thing to believe. But if you want to prove it to yourself, prove that that's the case, like that's an immense burden. And so I think we gently encourage the I don't know-ness. And I just want to add really quickly, what I think is important is that, you know, some people kind of experience, I've been told, experience like an epistemological crisis. There's some people who encounter the realization of how complex and dense and immense our epistemic space is. And they get really defeated by that. They're like, wow, I don't know, but it's very disempowering. I don't know. How could I possibly know? Look at all, oh my God, look at all of this. But for some reason, our students seem to get that intellectual tickle. They're like, whoa, like I had no idea. So I think the context of having that epiphany, that epistemic epiphany of like, wow, like it's really hard to like know things, can be introduced in different contexts. And that can be either empowering or disempowering. It can make people feel like I don't know how to operate in the world because I don't know anything, or I now have better tools to be more rigorous with myself when I'm inquiring into things. And I know, and I realize that a lot of decisions really come down to belief, assumptions, and bias. And because I'm a human and because we live in a human society and we only have the tools that we do, that's going to be okay. But at least I can make my, sense making a notch above now that I've experienced different techniques and tools that I can apply towards learning and understanding.
Yeah, and that's super potent too, because it's funny you bring up students a bunch of times, and I think there's something to the neuroplasticity of when we're young enough and we haven't been exposed to too much jadedness, too much ineptitude, like lack of coordination in the world. We don't have as much restrictions to lean in more into the neuroplasticity of curiosity, the neuroplasticity of exploration, the self-exploration included, right? It's still, there's still so much, right, open. And the older you get, it gets tougher. But I digress. I firmly believe that old dogs can learn new tricks too, because all the time I teach meditation to people in their 70s, 80s, 90s, and they've never done meditation. They never did a sound bath before. And then after the meditation, like, oh my God, never knew I could do that. And they start practicing it. So I think there always is that ability, but it is a matter of like, also, what does a teacher look like? What does the teacher feel like? What does the educator or the education system or you're doing stuff right here with Society Library? What is the vehicle that's inspiring?
To these students or to anyone?
I mean, at the end of the day, we're all students.
Yeah. So, I mean, to your point about students specifically, also, I just want to say, yeah, that's a matter of context, right? Like they may be in the right context for these things, but the Society Library is looking to broaden and appeal to other groups. Good. I forgot your question already.
Don't remember the question. Here's a better setup for based on what you're saying.
Okay.
What are your needs right now? Like what would support Society Library to take off and to like be amazing, even more amazing?
Right. So the resources question. Well, of course, like, we're a nonprofit, we accept donations, I will say what we want to do. The first thing we want to do in terms of our educational program is we want to MOOCify it or digitize it. So right now, our educational internship programs are overseen by a coordinator who, moves the program along, looks over the students' work, da, 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 da. What we want to do is create a digital educational product so anyone can participate in our training program. Anyone can go through it. It's kind of like a MOOC, which is like an online course that anyone can take, and it's like self-guided. So first, that's one of the things we want to do is we want to move it from, something where it's like a small class size and a teacher from the society library to something that is self-paced. We also want to start creating educational content as well. So just consumable content to start inspiring that comprehension of complexity and start inducing intellectual humility. So, I mean, I don't want to reveal too much, but TikTok's a hot platform, and we've been thinking about that. Like, how can we create like small, interesting, engaging little micro segments teaching people about this information landscape? So yeah, there's a few things in the pipe, but it's always a matter of capacity. So if there's any producers out there, if there's any people who work on video editing or anything like that, anyone who works in the creative arts, we would love to explore working with you potentially, because there's a lot of different content we want to create to kind of extend this, not only this epiphany of like, wow, it's like really hard to know things, but there are also tools out there and it's important to know, but we also want to extend the context. Right. We want the context through which people experience this epiphany to be positive and empowering.
Beautiful. And that being said, I have an idea that popped into my mind as you were sharing what your needs are. Is what if like there's like informational videos or like kind of short things and whatever. It could even have like music with it or not. They could be funny, but it'd be great to have an exaggerated Ben Franklin character, like a cartoon or a person. Like if it's a real person, that'd be great. But if it could be a cartoon too. I mean, it's whatever,
Actually, it's so funny. So the Society Library does have Benjamin Franklin characters. He was our initial logo. So we have a winking Benjamin Franklin, and then we have a Benjamin. You'll not find this on the website. Oh,
I want to find it on the website.
But dang. No, it's hidden away. We now have this, more elegant logo with the book and the laurel leaves. But we have a winking Benjamin Franklin. Actually, if you go to the Internet Archive, you go to archive.org and plug in the Society Library's URL and look at the very first snapshot of Society Library's website, which was made back when I had the idea, like before it was an organization. You'll see a winking Benjamin Franklin. And it was, I had the idea to also make like a more cutesy, like chibi Benjamin Franklin that was like more appealing and like could run around and be young and things like that. So yeah, so good idea. Oh, would that be a blast from the past?
Awesome. Oh my God, I'm gonna have to find this. It's taking so long to download.
Yeah. Oh, if you put in the URL in the Wayback Machine, societylibrary.org, I think, then it should pop up.
Right here, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Whoa.
Yep, and it'll give you a timeline. Yeah, if anyone doesn't know about the Internet Archive, they're fantastic. They archive the internet. They're a wonderful nonprofit organization. They are I think they may have 10 times more data than Wikipedia, and they have they're 10 times smaller as an organization in terms of operational budget. So they are just like angels, and they're currently working on a project to archive all of the different links of Wikipedia so that it doesn't, none of the links die out. So you can always look at the references, which is really lovely. If you literally go the earliest on in the timeline, early, the very first little black mark on that timeline, there's a winking Benjamin Franklin. If you hover your cursor over the Franklin, it winks.
But this is cool. I like the language here, the Central Intelligence Agency of the people, by the people, and for the people.
Oh boy. Oh yeah. That was the initial idea. Now I think we're more aligned with trying to model after the Congressional Revenue Service. But before, I was puzzled by the question, why don't the people have a Central Intelligence Agency? Congress has Central Intelligence Agency, but if individuals are the fundamental unit of democracy, don't we need to be informed? So who informs us? It's the media ecosystem, which is fantastic. The work of investigative journalists and everything is just amazing and perfect. But also, again, going back to resources, maybe the CIA of the people should be bankrolled by our own government, because that is the relationship between these entities is what keeps all the balances of power in check.
Right. Mm-hmm. Oh, look, there's you.
Oh, that's me.
Oh, you guys have a white paper too.
It should be coming. It just said coming soon, and then it became the Internet Government White Paper, and I keep kicking it down because new technologies emerge like DAO and with like
Right.
the pathways language model. So it just kind of keeps getting kicked down the road.
Why can't it be a brown paper? What's wrong, huh? Or yellow or red?
Whatever color paper you want.
Rainbow. When can we write a rainbow paper?
Sure.
So we only got a few more minutes, so I have a couple more questions, but I'm going to challenge you again because you wisely or expertly, I should say, dodged the question and you answered way more professionally. But I'm going to ask you something. I'm going to ask it more spiritually, right? Like where is Jamie? What and where is Jamie 3 years now? It asks as Society Library kicks off and all the different programs take off and all the needs are being met and the government supporting and all the different channels that you envision are support, and even like I said, ones that you haven't thought of, but maybe right now you're thinking about that would support Society Library to flourish. And what impact is it making in the community? Like what's the glass ceiling of that?
Oh, like the ultimate realization?
And for you too, personally and collectively.
Well, if the Society Library could reach its full potential, I'm not saying it needs to be the only institution, but it would at least be among institutions that would have effectively organized and consolidated all relevant knowledge to solve some of the most fundamental and persistent and high impact questions that a given society has in a society's own language through its own expressions, but of course also sourcing external from itself as needed in order to sincerely inquire into truth. And so I see right now the Society Library is working on high impact, persistent, polarizing issues of the social and political nature, but I think we could also tackle questions about life itself. What is the meaning of life, and have the ability to explore all of the different answers. And especially
we're basically going to make a machine that is Earth, and then we got to wait like 500 million light years to know what the answer is.
Maybe, or through the right coordination and resources, we could at least, without necessarily arriving at the right answer, we could see what are all the different answers that do exist and what kind of knowledge and evidence support it. And so the long-term vision that I really lean into is that I really want it so that future generations of people can grow up with more intellectual freedom and more choice in what they choose to believe in. So many of us are grown in specific contexts where we're assigned a religion, we're assigned political beliefs through bias, or like outright assignment, or just, encouragement, coercion, whatever. We adopt and inherit all of these ideas. Like I adopted and inherited that stereotype about glasses corresponding to intelligence, for example. So it would be really lovely for every human being to have a library through which they could sincerely explore all points of view on all of their questions and have a more like informed choice where they want to invest their belief, because belief is so powerful. Belief causes us to act. And so it's essentially a project to enable not only human enlightenment through access to information, but to enable human freedom. And so that's what I see, is that this actually being an institution that generations like rely on and help raise new generations of humans by enabling them to be more enlightened and open to all different points of view. So if this succeeds in society,
when this succeeds,
when this succeeds, when this succeeds, either in and of itself or in concert with various other groups who are working on different dimensions of like the human enlightenment challenge, where I will be, I probably would be just a homemaker and gardening and spending time in nature and crafting and doing art. Because I miss all of those things, because I mostly spend time in my office working. But you'll notice for people with videos, they'll see in my background, there's a ton of plants. So I love beautifying spaces. One of my favorite things used to be to like sculpt and architect the outdoors. So like create waterfalls and streams. I just love like tinkering with things and beautifying them. So if I were to retire one day, I probably would just beautify things for the rest of my life.
Beautiful. Wow. I don't imagine you retiring, quote unquote.
No, I don't think I will.
I don't think that's your jam. But like if you did run for anything, I would vote for you.
Well, thank you. I mean, I will say that has also been something that I've been thinking about, because the actualization of things is very important to me. Like, it's not just enough that the Society Library organizes knowledge. We have to put it in decision-making models so that people can use it and apply it so they can come to more informed decisions. And so I think that it would be foolish to ignore where power lies. especially like if I'm sincere, which
Pun intended.
yeah. Oh, nice. Especially if I'm sincere, which I believe I am, in being of service to people. So taking up a spot and taking up space to represent people and ensure that their interests are truly being represented, and potentially like enabling the possibility for more resources to be diverted to organizations. It couldn't be mine at that time, but other organizations like the Society Library, the bridging community, other people who are working on knowledge projects, education, all of these different things. So I think that's worth taking up space for. It's just a matter of, would it be possible to succeed in such an environment? Because I can't even conceive of how competitive and ruthless it may be, and how much money it really takes.
Maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe we've been entrained. You know, maybe our belief systems are based on epistemological crises.
You know what? Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. Maybe even in order for citizens to get a glimpse of all points of view, maybe we should all be taking turns participating in government in one way or another to gain that perspective, because maybe, you know, it only looks so ruthless from the outside. Who knows?
Totally. Or maybe it wouldn't be so ruthless if there were different stakeholders participating.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, you know, you had to.
I was getting at is, you know, be a good actor showing up in a space, and you slowly transform the space in your own little way through your own little influence.
And you get a lot of I don't know people in government, it'll be great. It'll change real fast. you get a few I don't know people who play instruments, it'll get even better faster. Okay. And if you get a few more I don't know people who laugh a lot,
that would be nice.
That would help a lot too. Okay, last question. Beautiful answer. Thank you for leaning into the future, a potential possible future that would be a lot more harmonic for all of us. What would you like to share with young, I'm gonna say young people, but young is relative, right? So being young in your heart, you could be 90 years old and young in your heart, right? But what would you say to young people about like inspiring them to be politically involved, to get politically engaged, to lean in more into the different aspects of political engagement? Like what would your advice be?
Yeah, so I mean, there's so many ways in which individuals can engage, and there's so many ways in which we can interpret politics. So the one kind of like broad thing I would say is for people, young people, everybody, to really understand that they are inherently powerful. They are inherently have influence. You know, my family members who just happen to be smart, who I happen to love and happen to wear glasses, you know, happen to have the influence that impacted the whole course of the rest of my life. So like you being who you are, the decisions that you make, your participation or not, inherently impacts the world around you. And so whether political engagement means getting out there and vote, meaning it could mean like actually trying to run for something, actually sitting in city council meetings, getting involved, like that's one thing. But also like the political decisions you make every day about how you develop your character and how you participate in society is also inherently political, because as you lend your power to certain ideals or to certain images or to certain trends or to certain beliefs, you are routing that power to like those concepts that could weaponize them, that could use them, that could rely on them as an assumption in order to advance other interests on your behalf. So just be aware that you, and never doubt that you are inherently powerful with everything that you buy, with every person that you vote for or don't, with everything that you do, you are routing power around the world. So just know that, and take a moment to yourself and think about what levers of power do I want to lean into and choose to be responsible for, and where do I want to route my power toward through those levers? What do I want to accomplish? What do I want to change? And know that, like, you know, you do this just out of respect for your own power, not necessarily expecting a result. Just because you vote for a certain candidate, don't expect that they win. Don't get insanely upset if they don't win, but just look for the other thing you're trying to accomplish. If you voted for someone because you're expecting them to achieve a certain outcome because they said they would pass a specific piece of legislation, they said they would advance a specific interest, if they don't win, look around at the other levers of power that you could use where you could reach the outcome that you wanted to see in the world, whether that's volunteering, whether that's donating money, getting involved yourself, writing a letter,
Writing
something.
policy, making
Writing
policy.
policy. Yes, writing policy, making policy. Absolutely. You are inherently powerful. So just remember that, know that, and then use it to create the change you want to see in the world.
Yeah. Oh my God. I love that. And if I put a cherry on top, I like to, on top of all of that is, yeah, like know that everything is the way that it is. It is the way it is because it's supposed to be. And then now it's like, okay, from that place, where can we go? Yeah.
I mean, I would just say it is what it is. Not even that it's supposed to be. It just it is what it is.
It is what it is. But then here, but then also we have people like you and all the different people out there who are doing incredible, creating incredible potential technologies that like also help us explore our potentiality. So thank you. Keep rocking it. I hope you come back another time with even more amazing updates and exciting news. And who knows, maybe, I don't know. I started meeting more people like you and other people that I'm interviewing that are doing great stuff. I'm like contemplating, like, what if like Political Hope has like some like a heart-storming kind of event where we bring together, and it's like a podcast, but like a roundtable podcast, like
love to participate.
Yeah, awesome. All right, thank you so much, Jamie. You're awesome. Keep rocking it out and say hi to Benjamin Franklin for me.
If he ever comes by, I will. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Jamie.